She was led barefoot through the stone temple, her arms bound, her face painted, her fate already sealed. The crowd below watched in silence, not because they were horrified, but because they believed this was holy. To them, she was not a woman anymore. She was an offering, a message to the gods, a heart for Huitzilopochtli, a breath for Tlaloc, and blood, warm and spilling, for the sun to rise again. This is not a myth. This is what happened to women in the Aztec Empire, not in secret, not in shame, but in ceremony. Blood for the sun. The Aztec world was built on sacrifice, not as punishment, not for crime, but as payment. They believed the gods had once sacrificed themselves to create the earth, the moon, and the sun. And now, humans owe them something in return. Without blood, the world would stop turning. So they gave blood, every day, from warriors, from children, and yes, from women, especially women. Because to the Aztecs, female life held sacred power. It was tied to fertility, to storms, to maize, to the gods of birth and death. And when those gods grew angry, when the crops failed or drought came, it wasn't enough to pray. Someone had to bleed, chosen by the priests. Most people think sacrifices were just war captives, but that wasn't always true. Some women were born into it, raised to die. From a young age, girls were selected by priests based on signs, birth dates, family lineage, omens, and the stars. They were told it was an honor, that they would become divine after death, that their pain would feed the sky. Many believed it. Some didn't. But either way, once chosen, there was no return. These women lived in temple quarters. They were forbidden from speaking to men. They were taught songs and rituals, how to dance, how to walk, how to look pure in the eyes of the gods. They were groomed not for marriage, but for death. Toci's daughters. One of the most terrifying rituals was a festival of Toci, the goddess of war and midwives. Every year, a woman was chosen to become her. She would be bathed, clothed in rich robes, fed like royalty. She would be treated as divine for weeks. Then, on the final night, they would cut off her head. Her body was ground into meal and fed to the priests. Because her death was not just a sacrifice, it was communion. Some stories say the chosen women smiled as they walked to the altar. Others say they had to be dragged. No one really knows, because their names were never remembered, only the blood they gave. The rain god's price. The god Tlaloc ruled over rain, harvest, and storms. But his appetite was cruel. He didn't want warriors. He wanted tears. So the priests brought him children, and sometimes young women, but it wasn't enough for them to die. They had to suffer, because the tears they cried during torture were considered sacred. Accounts say girls were beaten until they screamed. Some were buried alive beneath mountain shrines, their mouths stuffed with flowers. Others were drowned, their hands tied, so they wouldn't fight back. It wasn't called execution. It was called balance. The gods gave rain. The people gave daughters. The festival of flaying. One of the darkest ceremonies was the Tlacaxipol-Lisli, the flaying of men. It honored Zip-Totec, the god of rebirth. But what happened there was anything but beautiful. Prisoners, men and women, were killed by having their hearts torn out. Then their bodies were skinned, and their skin was worn by priests, by warriors, by dancers in the temple square. The women's faces were removed carefully, their lips sewn shut, their breasts flattened. The skins were worn for 20 days, believed to hold power. It was said to bring fertility, to make the corn grow tall again. But the truth? It was a warning that even beauty could be taken, stolen, worn like cloth, and then discarded. The woman on the steps. One eyewitness account from Spanish chroniclers tells of a woman brought to the top of the Templo Mayor, the main temple of Tenochtitlan. She was around 18. Her body had been painted blue, the color of sacrifice. Her hands were tied behind her back. She didn't cry. The priest held an obsidian blade, and without a word, he opened her chest and tore out her heart. It was rays of the sun, still beating, and her body was kicked down the temple steps, to the roar of drums and chants. This wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. Her blood flowed into the earth, and for one more day, the sun rose. Silence in stone. Today, if you walk the ruins of the great Aztec temples, you'll find carvings of women, some smiling, some screaming, some holding knives to their own necks. These weren't decorations. They were echoes, reminders of the women who were silenced for centuries, told they were chosen, told they were holy, but they were never asked, only taken, only remembered when the sky needed rain. The festival that silenced her name. During the festival of Huitzilopochtli, meant to honor the mother goddess Chicamcotl, a woman was dressed in red robes and golden jewelry. She walked barefoot through the city, singing prayers written for God she could never question. She was led to a shrine where she was offered maize and incense. Then, as the people danced, a priest slit her throat. Her blood mixed with crushed corn, and the mixture was buried in the fields. The message was clear. For life to grow, something had to die. No one remembered her name, not even in the songs. Blood as theater. To outsiders, it looked like madness. But to the Aztecs, sacrifice was sacred theater. The more painful it was, the more powerful it became. And the sacrifice of women, especially young ones, carried extra weight. Their bodies represented creation, fertility, the earth itself. So when a woman was killed, it was like offering the land back to gods. Witnesses say drums would thunder during the ceremony. Priests would paint their faces with ash and wear hummingbird feathers. And the people would chant until their voices broke. No one turned away. No one stopped it. Because to them, this wasn't cruelty. It was survival. Warriors and maidens. Women were not always helpless victims. Some were warriors, priestesses, midwives, poets, but even they weren't safe. One woman, remembered only as the flower maiden, was said to be trained in ritual arts. She carried obsidian knives, knew the chants, taught the young. But she, too, became a sacrifice, because the gods required not just strangers, but the purest, those closest to the divine. So when drought struck the valley, she was taken to the temple, and her blood was poured into the river. Her own students sang as it happened, because they believed it was what she would have wanted. The arrival of the Spanish. Then everything changed. In 1519, Spanish ships arrived on the shores of Veracruz. They came with iron swords, crosses, and plague. They saw the temples. They saw the altars. They saw the blood. And they were horrified. To them, this wasn't religion. It was hell. They burned shrines, toppled idols, and slaughtered priests. But they also silenced something else. They erased the stories of the women who were killed. They destroyed the songs. They tore down the memory and replaced it with another kind of silence, one that still lingers today. Skeletons in the earth. In modern-day Mexico, archaeologists have uncovered mass graves near old Aztec temples. Many of the remains are female. Some show signs of ritual cuts, broken ribs, or missing hearts. Others were children, and some are headless. One grave held the remains of 13 women, each laid in a circle, each facing inward. No jewelry, no names, just bones, and stone blades lying nearby. Their story had been buried for centuries, but the earth never forgets. A legacy etched in pain. Today, the story of Aztec human sacrifice is often told through numbers. How many died, how many hearts were taken, how much blood was spilled. But behind every number was a person, and behind many of those was a woman. She had a name, a voice, a life, and it was all taken, not for war, not for revenge, but for the sky. The last prayer. We don't know what these women thought in their final moments. Were they proud? Terrified? Did they believe it mattered? Or did they silently pray to live? History didn't record their answers, only their deaths. The stones of the temples are quiet now. The gods no longer drink blood, and the rivers have long since carried their stories away. But for those who listen closely, you can still hear her breath. You can still see her eyes on the altar, and you can still feel the truth behind the ceremony, that even in a world ruled by gods, it was women who paid the price.